The night had already swallowed up the street when I first saw her. The street lights flickered, casting their weak, yellow glow on the cracked pavement. It wasn't unusual to see someone walking down the sidewalk at this hour, but something about this girl caught my attention, how small she seemed against the vast, empty city, like she didn't belong. I thought nothing of it at first, figuring she was just another lost soul wandering home, but when she stopped and turned to look at me, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. She was standing in the middle of the street now, her figure barely visible in the dim light. The silence between us stretched on for what felt like ages, and it wasn't until she spoke that I finally moved. "Can you help me?" Her voice was soft, almost trembling, like it wasn't meant to be heard. But it felt wrong, like something was lurking beneath the surface of her words. I took a step forward, my eyes narrowing as I looked at her. She couldn't have been more than 10, maybe 11, but her face was pale, almost unnatural in its stillness. "What's the matter?" I asked, my voice a little too loud, too abrupt. "I can't find my parents," she said, her eyes glancing around, though there was nothing but empty streets and dark buildings surrounding us. "I was playing, and now I don't know where I am." I glanced down the street, half expecting to see some frantic parent running toward her. But no one came. Just the street. Just the night. "Where are you from?" I asked, my tone softer now, the instinct to protect kicking in despite the strange unease crawling up my spine. "I don't know," she replied, her voice carrying an odd echo that I couldn't shake off. "Can you help me find them?" There was something unsettling in her words, a dissonance that made my chest tighten. My hand reached into my pocket for my phone, and I stepped back a little. "I'll call the police. They'll be able to help you." The girl didn't move, didn't speak, and for a brief second, I thought she hadn't heard me. I turned to pull out my phone, my mind racing through the possible scenarios. Kidnapping? Runaway? Or something worse? As I dialed, the faint sound of her footsteps caught my attention. I spun around, my heart skipping a beat. She was standing far closer to me now, mere inches away, her black hair falling in uneven strands around her face. I hadn't heard her move, hadn't seen her come closer. How? The thought stopped me cold. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring into my eyes, her small, dark pupils swallowing everything they met. No light. No reflection. Just black, like the void itself had slipped into her soul and stolen the light. I froze. My stomach churned, and my breath caught in my throat. What the hell? I took a step back, my phone slipping from my hand and clattering to the ground. But I couldn't look away from her eyes. They were consuming me, dragging me in. I could hear the faintest hum, almost like a low drone, vibrating in my chest. It made my skin crawl. The air felt colder now, the world around me growing distant, as if I wasn't even standing on the same earth anymore. I wanted to scream, but my voice was lodged somewhere deep inside my chest, suffocated by the pressure building within me. There was nothing in my mind but that darkness in her eyes, the quiet hum that seemed to rattle my bones, and the overwhelming sensation that I had been here before, somewhere, sometime, but I couldn't remember when or how. My hands were shaking, and when I opened my mouth to speak, no words came. And then, just like that, the girl was gone. The air cleared, the humming stopped, and the night returned to normal. Or so it seemed. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I stood there for what felt like an eternity, unsure of what had just happened. I glanced around. The street was empty. There was no sign of her. Nothing. I dropped to my knees, heart racing, and picked up my phone. The call to the police had failed. It was just a dial tone. I tried again. And again. Nothing. I needed to get out of there. I needed to leave. I turned, ready to sprint back to my car, when something caught my eye. There, in the alleyway just ahead, was a shadow moving in the dark. My heart skipped again, but this time, the cold dread wrapped around me like a vice. I couldn't remember how long I had been standing there, or why everything felt so wrong. The streetlights flickered again. Another shadow, closer now, looming. I knew I had to run, but something in me hesitated. Then it all went black. I woke up to the harsh sting of the sun on my face. The world was blurry at first, foggy, and it took me a moment to realize that I was no longer standing on the street. I was lying on something hard, a concrete floor, and the smell of mildew hit me like a slap to the face. My head felt like it had been split open, the light too bright, the air too still. My limbs were aching, my muscles stiff from the cold, but worse than that, my skin felt wrong. There were cuts. Deep ones. Symbols, maybe. Scorched into my arms. Something unfamiliar, something ancient. I had no memory of how they got there, but they were real. And they burned. I tried to move, to push myself up, but the moment I touched the ground, a sharp pain shot through me, and I winced. When I looked at my hands, they were trembling. Dirty. Covered in dirt and something else, something thick. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know how I'd gotten here. All I knew was the overwhelming terror that clung to me, thick as the shadows in the room. And then I remembered the girl. Her eyes. The blackness. I didn't understand how I'd gotten here. The last thing I could remember was the girl, the black eyes, the darkness that seemed to crawl beneath her skin, the way she had stood so close to me, just staring, as if she could see through me, past me, into something I couldn't comprehend. I could feel the weight of it all, the feeling of being watched, of being tethered to something I couldn't escape, even though I hadn't moved from that spot in what felt like forever. The room I was in was cold, the air heavy with the stale smell of dampness and decay, and the walls felt like they were closing in on me. I glanced around in a panic, trying to make sense of my surroundings, but everything was hazy, my head still spinning as if the room itself was shifting, pulling and stretching in ways that didn't seem possible. A single window high up in the corner barely let in any light, casting everything in a faint, sickly glow. I could hear the hum of the city outside, distant and muffled, as though the world was happening far away from me, and I was trapped in some kind of limbo. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the fog in my mind, but when I pulled my hand away, my fingers were slick with something thick and sticky. Blood. It took a moment to process what I was seeing, what I was feeling. The symbols on my arms, they weren't just cuts. No, these marks went deeper, like they had been carved into my flesh by something, or someone. They looked like ancient runes, twisted and strange, their meaning just beyond my reach, like a half-remembered dream. I couldn't make sense of them, couldn't figure out where they came from or why they were there. But the more I looked at them, the more I realized they weren't random. They were deliberate. There was purpose behind them. The pounding in my head grew louder, each throb more painful than the last. I tried to stand up, to gather myself, but the moment my feet hit the floor, I stumbled, almost losing my balance. My body felt weak, like I hadn't eaten or drunk anything in days. The air felt like it was pressing in on me, thick and suffocating. There was a coldness that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the place, a biting chill that went straight to my bones. The room was eerily silent except for the sound of my breath, quick and shallow, and the occasional creak of what I now realized were old wooden beams stretching and groaning under some unseen weight. I needed to get out of here. I didn't know where here was, but I sure as hell didn't want to stick around to find out. I could feel my heart racing, the fear bubbling up in my chest like a pot about to boil over. I turned to the only door in the room, an old, rusted thing with peeling paint, and staggered toward it. My hands were shaking as I reached for the handle, the metal cold and slick under my fingers. I twisted it, but it wouldn't budge. I tried again, harder this time, but nothing. It was locked, or perhaps jammed. Frustration surged through me, mingling with the growing sense of panic. I pulled back and slammed my shoulder into the door, my body thrumming with adrenaline, but the door refused to give way. That's when I heard it. A soft sound, like a breath, too soft, too deliberate to be anything natural. It came from behind me. I froze. For a second, I thought maybe it was just the wind, the building settling, something explainable. But then the sound came again, closer this time. It wasn't just a breath. It was something else, something wrong. Something that made my skin crawl, that sent an icy shiver running down my spine. I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach as I glanced toward the far corner of the room. At first, I didn't see anything. Just shadows, stretching and twisting unnaturally under the flickering light. But then, I saw her. The girl. The one with the black eyes. She was standing there, as if she had always been there, blending seamlessly with the shadows around her. Her head tilted to the side, her small, fragile figure barely visible in the darkness. She wasn't moving, but her eyes, those black, empty eyes, were fixed on me. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I thought I might suffocate right there, in the cold, suffocating darkness of the room. The girl's eyes, they weren't just black anymore. They were empty. Hollow. As though whatever had been human about her had been sucked away, leaving nothing but the void behind. She took a step toward me. I couldn't move. I wanted to run, to escape, but my legs wouldn't work, my body frozen in place like it was trapped in some kind of nightmare. The hum in the air, that same low, vibrating sound, returned. It was louder now, more insistent, like it was coming from inside my own skull. It was deafening, and the room seemed to pulse with it, as if the very walls were alive, breathing in sync with the rhythm of my fear. Her small feet made no sound as she moved closer, and the coldness in the room seemed to intensify, wrapping around me like an invisible hand, squeezing the life out of me. She stopped right in front of me, so close that I could feel her breath on my face, cold as ice, but that wasn't what terrified me. It was her eyes. Those black eyes, now so close I could see the way they shimmered, as though they were absorbing the light from the room, sucking it into some dark, empty void. "I'm lost," she whispered, her voice a mere breath against my skin. "Can you help me?" I opened my mouth, desperate to speak, to say anything, but I couldn't. The words stuck in my throat. My heart hammered in my chest, and my body screamed at me to get away, but I was trapped. Trapped by her eyes. And then, everything went dark again. I woke up with a jolt. My head slammed against something hard, and I gasped, disoriented, my mind struggling to catch up with reality. The room was gone. The shadows were gone. The girl was gone. I was lying on the cold ground again, but this time, I wasn't in the same place. I was somewhere different. Somewhere worse. The world was quiet. Too quiet. And then, I felt it. The scrape of something moving across the floor, a shiver of cold air against my skin. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Black Eyes, 3rd episode. The silence in the room was unbearable. The darkness pressed in, thick and suffocating, and for a moment, I thought I might lose my mind. I didn't know where I was, or how I had gotten here, but one thing was certain, whatever had happened the night before wasn't some fevered dream, some twisted hallucination of my mind. It was real. And it wasn't done with me yet. I tried to move, but every part of my body felt heavy, like my muscles had been drained of all strength. There was a dull ache in my neck, and when I reached up to touch it, I could feel the raw, tender skin. I looked down at my hands, and the first thing I noticed was the blood, dark and sticky, smeared all over me. It was still fresh, warm, and I shuddered at the thought of what might have happened in those lost hours. I wiped my hands on my jeans, the smell of iron thick in my nostrils, but that didn't help. It only made things worse. I forced myself to sit up, my head spinning as the room swayed with the effort. I wasn't alone. I knew that much before I even opened my eyes. The air felt charged, thick with a presence that pressed in around me like a wall, suffocating, as if something was watching, waiting for me to make a move. I kept my breathing shallow, hoping against hope that whatever it was, whatever had followed me into this place, would just leave me be. But I knew better. It wasn't going to let me go. Not now. Not after everything. I forced myself to stand, my legs unsteady, and as soon as I took a step, I heard it, movement. Soft, barely perceptible, but unmistakable. The sound of footsteps, delicate and precise, as though someone was trying to remain undetected. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart racing. The air grew colder, the chill seeping into my bones, and I could feel it then, the feeling of being hunted. Of being stalked by something far darker than anything I could understand. I turned toward the source of the sound, but there was nothing, just the darkness. A void that stretched out in every direction, offering no answers, only more questions. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath, but the air was thick and suffocating, making it harder and harder to breathe. And then, I saw her. The girl. She was standing in the far corner of the room, almost blending into the shadows, her tiny form barely visible. But I could feel her eyes on me, those eyes, black as pitch, swirling like a void that sucked in everything around it. I didn't need to see her face to know that she was the one behind all of this. The one who had led me here. Who had pulled me into whatever nightmare this was. I opened my mouth to speak, to demand answers, but the words died in my throat. The silence was so absolute, so complete, that even the sound of my own thoughts seemed like an intrusion. I couldn't move. Couldn't think. The girl, standing so still, like she was waiting for something, waiting for me to do something, anything. But what could I do? How could I escape something that wasn't bound by the rules of this world? Help me. Her voice was barely a whisper, so quiet that I almost didn't hear it. But I did. I heard it, deep inside my chest, vibrating with an unholy resonance. It was the same voice she had used before, the one that sent chills down my spine and made my skin crawl. But this time, it wasn't just words. It felt like a command, like a pull on my very soul, urging me to do her bidding. I stumbled back a step, shaking my head, desperate to deny it. No. I wasn't going to help her. Not after everything. But then, I heard it again, louder this time, as though it came from inside my own mind. Help me. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the sound, but it wouldn't stop. The words dug deeper, until it felt like they were carved into the very marrow of my bones. The pressure in my chest grew, squeezing out all the air, leaving me gasping, helpless, as if the very room itself was closing in on me. I had to get out. I turned away from her, from those eyes, but it felt like I was walking through molasses. My feet dragged, heavy and unwilling, as if the very ground beneath me was trying to keep me from moving. Every step felt like a fight, like I was walking through a nightmare that wouldn't let me wake up. And then, just as I reached the door, I heard it, the sound of breathing. A soft, steady exhale, as though someone were standing behind me. I didn't dare look. I didn't want to. But I could feel it, the presence. That dark, suffocating weight, pressing down on me from every side. I reached for the door handle, my hands trembling, and when I twisted it, it opened. Just like that. As if whatever had been holding it shut had released its grip on me. I rushed through the doorway, my body moving faster than my mind could process. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I ran, stumbling down what felt like an endless hallway, my heart pounding in my ears, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls. There was no escape. I knew that now. Whatever I had unleashed, whatever I had found, was not something I could outrun. It was inside me now. It had marked me. The symbols on my skin, the blood, the girl, everything pointed to one terrifying truth. I was cursed. And I wasn't going to get away from it. Not this time. As I reached the end of the hallway, I looked up, and I saw something. A shadow. No, not just a shadow, something darker. A presence. Something that wasn't supposed to be real, but it was there. The girl, her black eyes glowing, standing in the doorway ahead of me, her smile widening as the darkness closed in, swallowing everything. And then, everything went black.